I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 11 and 12. We've been spending a lot of time in chapter 11, actually months and months and months. And we are now ready to move into chapter 12. So I invite you to study it ahead of time and get into the stories. There's two stories that start out chapter 12. They are both about the Sabbath day, which is interesting in itself. And then moves into a discourse that Jesus gives and some other things that take place. But chapter 12 is going to be an interesting chapter as well. But I want to, we are moving into chapter 12 tonight, but when we get done with this, you'll probably say he didn't say much about chapter 12. Because I want to spend one more time just going through chapter 11, which is the setup. They are so intimately connected that it's very, very difficult to separate them because the truth that he is presenting in chapter 11 actually sets the stage and becomes, chapter 12 becomes a continuation of that same identical truth. And it becomes very obvious as you move into it, and I hope you will see that tonight. So we're going back to spend most of the time tonight in chapter 11, giving you one more summary and review of this section. Let's bow in prayer. Jesus, nobody could speak to every single need and heart, background and thought process and experience of the day that is represented here tonight. We're all from different places and different thought processes and different backgrounds, and it would take a divine message, you speaking to us yourself, because you know us so well, and your word does that. So the message tonight is for me, and I believe it will be for every individual in this place because you will speak to them. And please, God, give me sense enough to have ears to hear and to be wide open to the message that you want to deliver to me tonight. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Chapter 10 actually is a chapter, as we learned, on the whole idea of ministry. He gives a class on ministry. He's going to send his disciples out, and then he does that. And then at the beginning of chapter 11, he is obviously teaching and preaching on his own without his disciples. They are out doing great miracles and preaching these great sermons and doing this great stuff. So while they're out, Jesus continues to preach. And of course, then it sets up in chapter 11 the scene where two disciples of John the Baptist, come and begin to quiz Jesus about the question which is given in verse 4, that is verse 3, are you the coming one or do we look for another? Which is the question John the Baptist is asking because he's in jail. And so there's some maybe doubt and depression going on in the life of John the Baptist, and he's wondering about whether he's really dead on track here. And you can understand why, because the disciples are out having a great success. I mean, they're on the Today program, Dr. Phil's program. They're written up in the Today, and they're written up in Time magazine, and just everything's going their way, and the crowds are just humongous. And John the Baptist is in jail. So you look at that and say, whoa, he's missed it someplace. Because if he was really successful, he'd be on TV, and he would be all that you could think of in terms of a successful minister. So obviously he's blown it somewhere. So these disciples come and say, are we really on track here? John wants to know. And of course, Jesus answers that question by getting them involved in the ministry, and they begin to experience the movement of God. And there's something about being there and feeling it and seeing it that literally changes your life. And I'm trusting that's going to happen in your life tonight. Now, they have gone, those disciples have gone, and Jesus in verse 7 begins to validate and vindicate the ministry of John the Baptist before this crowd. And what he really begins to talk about is the old covenant over on this side, which John the Baptist represents. He's really the greatest of the old covenant. He's the number 10 on the list. He's done better than anybody else. He's far above all in the old covenant. And over on this side, he begins to compare with that the kingdom of heaven. And the contrast is given to you in verse 11. He says, assuredly, Jesus is speaking in verse 11, chapter 11. Assuredly, I say to you, among those born of women, there's not risen one greater than John the Baptist. That's over here. The human race, the old covenant, and the old covenant, of course, had a particular methodology to it. The methodology of the old covenant, in comparison to the new covenant, of course, was the idea of performance. It was the law. It was legalism. It was the law laid out for us. It was the law given to us. And we were, of course, responsible for getting it done. In other words, God's over there, I'm over here. He's given us the law, and I've got to get it done. I'm responsible for it. I've got to pull it off. The methodology is one of doing and self-sourcing and self-being and accomplishment on your own. And we've all been there. We know what that's like. To have expectations made of us that this is what we should do, and then how am I going to get that done? Oh, I'm going to have to do that. But I don't know enough. I'm not strong enough. But I got to do it. But I can't do it. Oh, what a bind. And then when you don't do it, you're a failure, and you have overwhelming guilt. That's the whole old covenant. Is there an amen in the house? Amen. We've all been there, haven't we? I know this is what I should be, but I'm not that. Well, why not? Well, I don't know. I did my best. But my best is never good enough. That was true when I mowed the yard for my dad. It was never good enough. I'm sharing some of my psychological problems with you tonight. Yeah, you never did it good enough. There was always a strip you missed. You never could pull it off. That's the old covenant. And we've all tried, and we've all been there. Now, in contrast to that methodology is this over here, which is the new covenant, which he calls in verse 11, the kingdom of heaven. And the kingdom of heaven is unique because it's a whole different methodology. See, the category over here is greater, which John the Baptist was, 1 to 10. He was a number 10. And we like this over here because we can measure it. See, I can compare myself to you, and I really look good. It was a joke, folks. So that's the methodology over here. It's the category over here is greater. The category over here is least. Who's in the category of the least? It's a guy called he. Well, who's that? Well, it doesn't matter. Pick anybody you want to in the kingdom, and he's the guy. Because everybody in the kingdom is in that category. See, there's only one in the category over here of greater. Why? Because he did better than anybody else. So he's on top of the heap. But over here in the kingdom, we're all in the same category. Why? Because it isn't about us. Because it isn't the methodology of doing. It's the methodology of relationship. Jesus is calling you into a relationship. He's not calling you into an activity. He's calling you into a relationship. He's not calling you into a series of things to accomplish. He's calling you into a relationship. And the dynamic of the kingdom is wrapped up in that relationship. Because the kingdom is not a place to which you go. It's not a place in which you enter. It is a relationship that you have. Here is the helplessness of your being. And you embrace the unlimited resource of his person. And in that embrace, you become the kingdom. You and him in the embrace make up the kingdom. He can't be the kingdom on his own. You can't be the kingdom on your own. But in the embrace, you become the kingdom. That's over here. And all he's asking is for the response out of you to get into the embrace. He's calling you to that. Now, as he develops this, you'll go down then to verse 16. And he leads into this section that we dealt with but haven't talked about for a long time. What shall I liken this generation, he says. You're like children. You're sitting in the marketplace calling to their companions and saying, we play the flute for you and you did not dance. We mourn to you and you did not lament. For John, this is the old covenant, He came neither eating nor drinking, and they said, he has a demon. And the Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look, a glutton and a winebibber. So here's the old covenant, and John represented the best of the old covenant, and you didn't like him. Jesus came along, and he represented the relationship of intimacy with God, and you didn't like that. John came and he kept the laws better than anybody else. Jesus came and he broke your oral tradition consistently, and you didn't like him. So you don't want to keep the law, and yet you don't want relationship. So what is it that you want? If I give you the law, you don't like that. If I give you relationship and intimacy with God, you don't want that. So would you please tell me what it is you want? Because you just can't be pleased. Interesting dilemma, isn't it? We want intimate relationship with God when we're in trouble so he can get us out of it. We want to do it on our own. We want intimate relationship with God as long as he doesn't get in our way so we can do what we want to. See, we're just, would you please get in one or the other? He says. Then he comes to verse 20. In verse 20, he begins to rebuke the cities. There's 3 of them, Chorazin, Bethsaida, Capernaum. And why is he rebuking? I mean, it's a strong rebuke. I mean, he basically tells them they're on their way to damnation. And what is he rebuking them about? Oh, they were so wrapped up in their traditions, they were so wrapped up in the old covenant, that when the new covenant kingdom walked their streets, they ignored it. They were so blinded by their own doing and their own accomplishment, so wrapped up in their religious traditions, that when the wonder of the intimacy of God literally walked their streets and spilled out among them, they ignored it and missed the whole thing. And it was all, again, in a contrast between the old covenant, the law structure, the doing, the performance, the accomplishment, over against the intimacy and the oneness of relationship with God. They missed it. Then you come to verse 25. And it's in this section that Jesus brings them into this. Come to me. This is what I'm calling you to. Come to me, which is the new covenant. The old covenant has been fulfilled and brought into the new covenant. So technically, it doesn't exist. It's not an option anymore. It's this intimate relationship with Jesus that is your option. Do you mean there aren't any rules anymore, that all the rules are gone? It isn't about rules. It's about methodology. See, the issue over here is not rules. The issue over here is doing, performance, and source of the doing. The issue over here is not no rules. The issue over here is, oh, how are you going to live this out? By what source is this going to be done? If you say in the new covenant there's no rules, let me take you to a passage. You can turn there if you want to. It's Galatians chapter 5. Now, this is the Bible. Paul is writing, Galatians chapter 5. He makes this outstanding statement at the end of verse 21 and says, those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. That's what he says. I didn't say that. That's not a judgment on my part. Hey, if I had my way, we'd let everybody in. But that's what he said. Well, what practices is he talking about? Oh, look at this. Verse 19. The works of the flesh are evident, which are adultery. There's a rule for you. You want a rule? There's one. Adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lewdness, idolatry, sorcery, hatred. Oh, brother. Contentions. You know what contentions are? Griping and complaining. Contentions, jealousies, outburst of wrath, selfish ambitions, dissensions. Oh, brother. Dissensions, heresies, envy, murders, drunkenness, revelries, and the like, of which I've told you before, just as I also told you in the times past, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. Now get this. You do those things, you don't get in. But you could not do those things and still not get in. Did you get that? That's really important. You do those things, you don't get in. Don't do those things, and you still don't get in. Why? Because it's not about doing them or not doing them. It's about relationship. Because you see, there's a whole new methodology going on here. And the methodology of the old, which was performance and doing, is gone. And Jesus is saying, why don't you come to me? Why don't you come to me? And an invitation is made to you. He wants you to come to him. Now, who is it that's to come to him? Well, that's laid out for you in verse 28, and we've talked a lot about this. All who labor, and you remember the word labor there means absolutely exhausted, worn out. Why? Well, because you've been in the old covenant, and you've been doing all this stuff, man, and it's wearing you out. The guilt is awful because you don't meet up. You don't match up. You don't get it done. You try as hard as you can and still aren't. And you work you're exhausted because you're the source of it all. God's over there. I'm over here. I'm trying to get it done. It's wearing me out. So if you're in that position, I'm inviting you, come to me into a new covenant. Not only those who are exhausted, but he gives this heavy laden thing. The heavy laden is the freight that's put upon a ship. So you are just loaded down. But that's what this was all about. See, I've discovered that you got to have rules. And the more rules you have, the more rules you have to have. Because you have to have rules to correct the rules. Because it really gets complicated. And the Jews ended up having so many rules that it was like a weight. Oh. Jesus is saying, why don't you come to me? Come to me. And what will he give me? He says twice he says this. I will give you rest. I will give you rest. You will find rest for your soul. You mean I could be lazy? Not talking about laziness. You mean I could just sit back at home and do? He's not talking about not doing. He's not talking about inactivity. He's talking about methodology. He's talking about over here, the source of everything is me and my doing. Over here, the source of everything is him and his dynamic flow. It's intimacy. It's relationship. He says that the very essence of the need of your life is a linkage. And he begins to talk that language in the passage. Take my yoke. Oh, my yoke. That's linkage. My yoke. That's intimacy. See, over here you were on your own. Trying your best. Wearing you out, isn't it? Work it out. I know. Just try to raise those kids. They never do what they're told. See, it wears you out. Just absolutely wears you out. Try to handle those circumstances. Things never turn out the way you want them to. Come on. It's Murphy's Law. Isn't going to happen. Hey, for every flat tire, there's probably another one on its way. You can count on it. See, leave early. Why? Because you won't get there on time if you don't. Because something's going to happen. See, it doesn't matter how hard you try. It'll wear you out. I'm talking about linkage, relationship, coming together with him. See, it's a whole new methodology. It's a partnership. It's an intimacy. It's a oneness. It's a new source. Well, if I would accept his invitation and come to him, what would that mean? I want to give you 3 ideas. Number 1, we touched on this last week, responsibility or responsible. Nouns in the passage. Oh, look at them. Verse 28. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your soul. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Do you realize that in the new covenant, he has taken on total, absolute ownership of this thing? In the old covenant, who owns it? You do. Yeah, the responsibility's yours. See, God's over there. He gives you a list of things. You got to pull it off. Good luck. You own it. It's your deal. It's your life. It's your responsibility. Come on. You get it done. You're responsible for praying. You're responsible for reading the Bible. You're responsible for getting yourself to church. You're responsible for adequate ministry. You're responsible for putting money in the offering plate. Come on. Shape up. Get it done. Come on. Come on. Work on it. You're responsible. Why? You own it. Over here, the total ownership is his. Do you know what a relief that is? With ownership comes responsibility. Come on, we've talked this before. For a few days this next week, I'm going to a revival. I got a rental car, picked it up today. Again, you know how many times I'm going to check the oil? Why? It's not mine. I don't give a rap. Why? Because I'm not responsible. Come on, that ought to make sense to you. When I'm responsible, now white lightning, I check the oil every other day. Have to. But I'm not checking it on this thing. See, it isn't that I can't check oil. It's just the shift has taken place. I don't own the thing. And I'm not responsible for it. You know what that feels like? Rest. Relaxation. Well, you're not in bed. I know. You're not taking a nap. I understand that. Well, you're acting and you're going to drive the car like, I know. You're going to jam on the brakes. You're going to speed. I know. Run the stoplights. I know. Going to do all that stuff you normally do. I will. But there's a rest in it. Why? Not my car. Want to live that way? Come to me. What's my life? Good luck. Work on it. See how you get done. See how you get along. the end of it, look at yourself and say, oh, this is what I wanted to be. What if you gave your life away into intimate relationship and he became responsible for you? Well, he doesn't know me. Number of hairs on your head. Created you, has purpose for you, destiny for your life. And most of us would line up and say, I've done my best, I worked on it, I own my life, I tried to pull it off, I had my home, my family, my this, my that, my the other, I did the best I could, I was responsible, and it didn't work out like I planned. Come on, man. What would happen if you didn't own it? If you gave it to him? If you gave it to him? The old covenant never offered that to you. The old covenant was God's over there, I'm over here, I own it, I got to do it, it's my responsibility. The new covenant says, you're not adequate for it. Come to me. Embrace me. I will own it. I will be responsible. Do you know what it's like to get up in the morning and know that nothing during that day can take place that's going to hurt you because he's in charge? You mean nothing bad's going to happen to me? That's exactly right, because when he gets done with it, it'll be good. May take a while, but it'll be good. Because he's that way. Everything he owns is good. You got to get in on this, man. Come to me. Come to me. Let me give you another one. These overlap, but relationship. Look at verse 30. For my yoke, link with me, for my yoke is easy. Now, we talked about easy last week and did so poorly, we got to do it again. It's only used 7 times in the whole New Testament. That word, 7 times, only 7 times. And there's absolutely no English word that describes it. There's no word you can use in the English say, oh, easy is it. Nah, it isn't it. It's way off. Isn't what it means at all. The idea of the word has to do with to use, to make the most of, to furnish what is needed. It has to do with purpose and completion and fulfillment. It has underneath it the idea of divine kindness. That he is so good and kind that he's working out, using, fulfilling, bringing to completion all that you need in your life. It has the idea of being an employee, and he's an employer, using you to your fullest potential. Oh, wouldn't that be neat? Wouldn't that be neat? I don't know how to describe this to you. I know the old covenant never gives you anything like that. He's over there, I'm over here. He says, here's what you got to do. I'm responsible, and I got to be the resource to fulfill and pull this off and complete it, and have never got it done. But in the come to me, there is a linkage that goes on. And there is a divine Christ that fills you and begins to do something in you and through you that begins to be the resource by which you operate. It's like he's got your back. Really struggled with what kind of illustration I could give to you. Let's go back to the car thing. And this isn't adequate, but let's go back to the car thing. Got this new car. Oh, insurance. Going to have insurance on it. Why? Well, one reason, because there's a big payment they demanded. But even if I didn't have a payment on the car, I would get insurance. Why? Because something might happen, probably will, happen to that car. And I'm not adequate. My resource isn't adequate. If I totaled that car, whew, I couldn't replace it. And the lawsuits from the guy that I hit. See, I'm not adequate for that. I couldn't pull that off. I could risk it. Chances are I'd get caught. Because my resource is just not adequate. What I do is I go to someone who has the big bucks, the insurance company. Why? Because there's a lot of little guys like me that give them a lot of money. And they got my back. And if I have a wreck, they've got the resource to pull it off. Replace my car, take care of the lawsuits, hire the lawyers. You really want to be on your own? You got the resource. You can't even live one day out of your own resource and be adequate, let alone die and pull off the resurrection stuff. See, you need somebody with the big bucks. Come to me. Come on, come to me. Don't! See, the old covenant never gave you this. The old covenant was over there. God's over there. I'm over here. And I got to pull this off. And I got to cover myself. And when I fail, no company, nobody with the big bucks. Come to me. The new covenant. Jesus wants linkage with you and wants to be the resource to pull off what you can't do. And I'm telling you, I'm not just talking about dying. I'm talking about every single day of your life. The energy of his person. The flow of his love. The victory over sin. The adequacy of the resource that he wants to spill through your being to make you adequate in the crisis that you're going to continue to face in your life. Don't be on your own. He's adequate. Number 3. Come to me. It's an invitation. What does this mean? Responsibility, number 1. Responsibility? Oh, yeah. He's going to own it, so he's responsible for it. Whew, that's rest. That's rest. Because I'm not responsible. He is, and I can trust him. Resource. Oh, he's got my back. My resource is so limited, I can't, oh, mercy. But he is so adequate. That's called rest. I can rest in the adequacy of his resource. Peace of mind. Number 3, relationship. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. Oh, the word light only used twice in the New Testament. I want to give you one other place where it's used. The other place it's used besides our passage here is found by the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 17. And it says, for our light, there it is, for our light afflictions, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. I want you to wrap your mind around that. Come on, think that through. Think that through. Let me read it again. For our light afflictions, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. What is he talking about? He's talking about your life. He's talking about all the things you're upset about. He's talking about all the difficulties. He's talking about all the hardships. He's talking about all the things that grind you. He's talking about all the things that go wrong. He's talking about all the broken relationships. He's talking about all the failure, all the defeat, all the stuff that's all around you that keeps beating on you. He's talking about all of that. He says, oh, light afflictions. Now, if you're in the old covenant, you look at it and say, brother, that's not true. This is heavy. And it is. Life beats you to death, I know. People are so mean, I know. Nobody understands me. That's true. Well, don't look at me. I don't either. Life is so heavy, I know. And if you stood up and told your story, we would all be in tears. I know. Isn't it sad? Yes. Well, if it's that heavy, why does he call it light? Come to me. See, over here you're on your own. Heavy. Over here it weighs the same. But his resource makes it light. In fact, let me read to you the context of that verse. Here it is. Here's what he's describing. Listen to this. We are hard pressed on every side, yet not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. We're always carrying about in the body the dying of the Lord Jesus, that the life of Jesus also may be made manifest in our body. For we who live are always delivered to death for Jesus' sake, that the life of Jesus also may be made manifest in our mortal flesh. Then he moves into this, for our light afflictions. Everything I just described to you is light afflictions. Why? In light, they are light because of the resource that is making us adequate. The old covenant never gave that to you. In the old covenant, you were under the weight of all your afflictions, and they buried you. And no one came to help you. In the new covenant, come to me. It's a new deal. Link the yoke. I want you to go back with me in chapter 11 to this word heavy laden again. Because the idea of heavy laden is the freight that's put on a ship, the large cargo. It weighs you down. And he says the old covenant was like that. It just weighed us down. Weighed us down. It was heavy, a heavy burden. There's another place that word is used. In Matthew chapter 23, verse 4, Jesus' last preached message. And here's what he said. For they bind, talking about the Pharisees and the old covenant, they bind heavy burdens. There's our word. Heavy laden, heavy burdens. Same word. Hard to bear. They lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their little fingers. He says, you know what the old covenant did to you? People got a hold of the old covenant. They adjusted it. You know how they adjusted it? They adjusted it by making rules that didn't bother them. I love to do that. I love to have rules that don't bother me. Why? It's easy. It's light. Preacher came to preach one place. One of the key laymen got him aside and said, listen, you don't dare talk about money here. We got some really wealthy people and we don't want to offend them. Okay. Said, you don't dare talk about civic clubs here. Because we've got all kinds of members in all kinds of civic clubs here. And you might offend them and they'd quit coming. So can't talk about that. Okay. Okay. Said, listen, you don't dare speak about the educational system. Because we've got all kinds of school teachers here. And we don't want to offend them. And you don't dare mention sexual sins, because there are some affairs going on in the congregation. And some of them are it's really touchy, the interrelationships, and don't dare talk about that. The preacher looked at him and said, well, what would you like for me to talk about? He said, well, we don't have any Jews here. You could give it to the Jews. Let's make up some rules that don't bother us. Then we can just get together and we can just lambast and give it to those who break the rules that don't bother us. That's what they did. You think we haven't done that? He says, let's get out of this and let's talk about intimacy, relationship. A resource that will help you, that will become the very energy by which you bear your burdens. And that the answer is in intimate relationship, not adjusting the rules so they don't bother you. They're in the linking with his yoke. See, wouldn't it be something if in the relationship with him, the obligation that was so heavy over here could become delight over here? Wouldn't it be interesting, folks, if the burden that was so heavy over here could become passion? The passion of my life over here. Wouldn't it be something if the hate, that just weighed me down and brought me to all kinds of wrong activity over here could be turned into love over here? In the relationship, suddenly all the rules become light in the relationship, calling you to a relationship, calling you to rest. Chapter 11. Now, here it comes. We're going to quit. He leaps into chapter 12 and tells two stories right off the bat. And you know what the two stories are about? The Sabbath day. And you know what the word Sabbath means? Rest. Let me show you how what I've just told you in chapter 11 plays itself out in everyday life. Disciples are walking through the grain field on the Sabbath day, the day you're to rest. They pick, they eat. And Pharisees are bent out of shape, saying, look, verse 2, chapter 12, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath day. Go to verse 9. Verse 10. There's a man with a withered hand. They ask, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day? And they did that they might accuse him. And he did heal him. Rest. What's the problem? See, over here, you think of rest. Get this. Over here, we're going to develop this. Over here, we'll probably talk about this for about 3 or 4 months. Over here, well, maybe not that long, just 2 months. Over here, you consider rest to be a vacation, a week, a day. I work 6 days, rest. Woo, the Sabbath day. See, you consider, I do these activities all this time, and then I quit those activities, and you consider rest to be 1 day. That's the best you could pull off over here. Enter into the rest. You talking about a vacation? Yeah, it's kind of like that, but it's all the time. All the time? All the time. Lounge in his arms all the time. Kick your shoes off. Let him have ownership. Let him be the resource of your life all the time. This is not Monday, I've got to. Tuesday, I have to. Thursday, I got to work this out. Secular life, religious life. Come on. The rest of the new covenant is a rest perpetually, always. Live in a rest. In fact, let's develop a phrase. Every time somebody asks you how you are, you look at them and say, resting. Resting. What do you mean you're resting? I'm not responsible. He is. It's not my resource. It's his. I'm in intimate relationship. Lounging in his arms. Jesus, whew. I've been on the religious vacations. I've done the revival scene, the 1-week religious vacation. Really felt good. Made the trip. Look forward to the Sabbath day when you will move and touch my life. Is it possible that I could live in you, you could live in me, and it wouldn't be 1 day a week? It wouldn't be a service I attend that I would experience you in the very essence of the flow of my life. Oh God, help us tonight to recognize the old covenant of performance and doing never offered that to us because it had no possibility. The law, rules, never brought that to us. There was no resource. Bring us into come to me. Heads are bowed. Oh, invite you to Jesus. Come on, you got to quit struggling with this. You've taken ownership. You feel the pressure. We've been saying around here, well, I got a lot on my plate. I know. So why don't you just don't have a plate? Why don't you give him the plate? Probably the same stuff will be on it. It's always been on it. But it won't be your plate. He wants to pull you into himself. Come to me. Yoke, easy, light. Problems haven't changed. Weight hasn't changed. Difficulties haven't gone away. It's not yours. He's your resource. He's got your back. Would you trust him tonight for your life? Altar's open. Want to seek with me?